It's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast. These are our top stories this morning. Russia says 3 military personnel have been killed by falling wreckage from a Ukrainian drone shot down over an airbase southeast of Moscow. Retailers hope to move unsold winter stock with bigger Boxing Day discounts as they grapple with budget-squeezed shoppers and another day of transport disruption.
Retailers like those here in central London could face further setbacks with trains not running today as strikes continue.
Police hunt for a gunman who fired several shots at a pub near Liverpool, killing a young woman who was out for Christmas drinks.
I'll have the latest live from the scene here in Wallasey Village as another man remains in a critical condition in hospital following the incident.
At least 50 people are now known to have been killed in almost unprecedented winter storms sweeping North America. Dual British nationals are among several people arrested in Iran over anti-government protests. Warnings about what lies ahead this winter after a sharp rise in the number of homeless people dying in Scotland. The plight of those struggling and living rough was a focus of the King's Christmas address. We look at how the papers reacted. In sport, Mikel Arteta calls for leaders Arsenal to keep their standards up as the Premier League returns after the World Cup. And the weather, colder with sunshine and showers for most, wintry on the hills, especially over Scotland, but many eastern parts will be fine. Hello, good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Russia says 3 of its military personnel have been killed by falling debris from a Ukrainian drone, which it says it shot down over an airbase. The Engels airfield in the Saratov region of southeast of Moscow was hit earlier this month in what Russia said were Ukrainian drone attacks. It's a major Russian bomber operations base. Well, Sky's Yusra Elbagir is in Kiev for us this morning. And how significant are these deaths, Yusuf?
I mean, it's very significant, but it's also important to note that the statement given to Russian news agencies doesn't say that the drone hit the base. It says that the drone was approaching the base at a low altitude, and the falling wreckage of it being shot down is what killed those 3 Russian military personnel. Now, this is still a huge reputational blow to Russia. Engels is a very important strategic airbase. A lot of the recent airstrikes coming out of Moscow in recent weeks have been from Engels. And so there is a sense of embarrassment at the moment that this is twice in recent weeks that Engels has been hit. The last hit was on December 5th. And now, just on the morning after Christmas Day, another hit happens. Meanwhile, here in Ukraine, yesterday on Christmas Day, Russia rained down missiles on towns across the country, reportedly more than a dozen attacks as people came together to break away from Russian tradition, some of them to celebrate Christmas on the Gregorian calendar instead of Eastern tradition to celebrate on January 7th. And now this double strike could fuel a retaliatory uptick of airstrikes from Russia.
Thank you very much. Now, police say a 26-year-old woman killed in a pub shooting on Christmas Eve was shot in the head and was not believed to have been deliberately targeted. 4 men were hurt during the incident at the Lighthouse pub in Wallasey Village on Merseyside. 1 remains in a critical condition. Well, Merseyside police say that the attack took place at a time when the pub was crowded with people enjoying a night out.
The fact that this has happened on Christmas Eve makes the tragedy even more unpalatable and shows those responsible have no regard for members of the public who just want to be able to live their lives without fear. At the time the offender fired the gun, there were a large number of people enjoying a night out at the Lighthouse Inn, and the actions of the gunman were totally and utterly reckless.
I'm joined now by our correspondent at the scene, Fraser Maud. And Fraser, what more do we know about what happened that night?
Well, from what we know from the briefing that police gave us, the most recent information from police is that a gunman approached the front of the building, in front of the pub there, the lighthouse behind me, and started firing apparently indiscriminately. We heard eyewitness reports talking of several gunshots, a volley of fire, 5 shots in very quick succession, followed by a short pause, another couple of shots, another couple of shots after that. So potentially up to 9 or 10 rounds were fired just towards the entrance of the pub. The police say it was totally reckless. It was callous, it was brutal, it was cold-blooded, and during that brief volley of gunfire, sadly the 26-year-old woman was hit in the head. She was taken to Arrow Park Hospital about 6 miles away from here, where sadly attempts to save her life failed. Other people have been injured. A 28-year-old man remains in a critical condition in hospital after receiving gunshot wound to his body, and then 3 other people also receiving hospital treatment for gunshot wounds. One who was hit in the legs, one in the hand, one in the wrist. Those injuries are not thought to be life-threatening. So police have launched a murder investigation. Of course, gun crime and firearms incidents were brought into sharp focus in Liverpool in August this year, when 3 killings took place, 3 shootings took place within the space of just a couple of weeks. One of them, the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in her own home. Ashley Dale, Sam Rimmer, the other 2 victims. One man has been charged and has appeared in court and pleaded not guilty to the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. But in terms of the other incidents, the arrests have been made, and several arrests have been made, and people have been released either under investigation or on police bail. So police are very keen to point out that gun crime has been brought more under control here in Liverpool than in the past. There have been fewer shooting incidents in the last 2 years here than in many of the previous years, and police say that they are making concerted efforts to try and make the streets safer. In terms of this investigation, we've seen forensic officers down here taking away bags of evidence for further examination. Door-to-door inquiries have been underway. A lot of CCTV footage has been handed into police, and they say they've had a very positive response, particularly from people who were inside the pub enjoying their Christmas Eve before this incident happened. There's also CCTV from the car park of the pub, and police believe that the gunman, once he'd carried out his attack, made his getaway in a dark-coloured Mercedes A-Class car. We believe there is footage of that on CCTV from the pub car park, which has been handed over to police, and that's one of their major lines of inquiry. But of course, they're wanting anyone with any information about this tragic incident to come forward and give it to the police as soon as possible.
Fraser, thank you. Shoppers hoping for Boxing Day bargains are facing traffic jams and delays as another round of rail strikes keep trains at a standstill after Christmas. It's another headache for retailers hoping to shift extra stock left on the shelves during a disappointing December. Some started their sales early and say they're offering bigger reductions. Well, Saba Chowdhury is in central London and she can tell us more. And Saba, are people queuing there?
Good morning. Well, it's still a little bit early for that, although I should say, I am honest. I should be honest that I thought there would have been more people at this point in the morning, but clearly not. Now, traffic jams for later in the day should be expected, and that's because thousands of people have been forced to make alternative travel plans, and that is because of the ongoing rail strikes that we have been seeing these past few weeks. Now, typically on Boxing Day, there are hundreds of trains operating, and this is, of course, the day after the Christmas shutdown that we usually see at this time of year. But the RMT union, its members, are on strike, and that's until tomorrow, 6 a.m. In the morning. Now, this is, of course, a pay dispute with the government. The union are asking for more money. Government saying we simply cannot afford it. And because of that, the AA are predicting more than 15 million cars will be on the road later today, and that's across the United Kingdom. Now, these strikes have also meant that sales this year with some brands have come early. So we're here on Carnaby Street. There are around 100 or so shops, and some of those are expected to have already started their sales. Now, an example of some shops that have started their sales a week or so early, John Lewis and Debenhams. They're going up to 80% off, and that's simply because of excessive stock. The rail strikes have had a significant impact on consumers going out to the shops, and for that reason the businesses understandably are very keen to shift as much as they can today. It's quite bad, some experts are saying, with one particular person calling it a sign of distress in this particular market. Now, these strikes, compounded with the cost of living crisis, mean that it is expected that less people will be spending money compared to previous years on Boxing Day. But surely this will not come as a surprise to many people, as the cost of living crisis has affected just so many of us.
Saba, thank you. Well, to that huge winter storm hitting Canada and the United States now, where at least 50 people are now known to have died. Hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses were without power on Christmas Day, with the so-called bomb cyclone stretching from the Great Lakes near Canada to the Rio Grande along the border with Mexico. Our US correspondent James Matthews has this report.
These Christmas storms continue to bite. Much of North America has shivered in scenes like these for several days. Blizzards, unrelenting, have rolled through Christmas Day. This was Buffalo in upstate New York. Of many places badly affected, it was among the worst.
All of us think in historic and epic terms, but this one is for the ages, and we're still in the middle of it. We still have people who need to be rescued. We have people with their power off in our communities, and buildings where pipes are bursting and flooding is occurring, as is happening in my own home right now. So this is what's happening in real time. It is a devastating experience. I cannot overstate how dangerous the conditions still are.
This so-called bomb cyclone has left destruction in its wake, and death too. A number of people have been killed on the roads in whiteout conditions. These are pictures of emergency services attending a fatal bus crash in British Columbia, Canada. The vehicle rolled over in icy conditions. Travel chaos that saw thousands of flights cancelled in the run-up to Christmas saw a last dash on the day itself. The last of the bomb cyclone is forecast to blow through in the coming hours. Here it leaves behind a Christmas they'll remember as one they want to forget. James Matthews, Sky News in Washington.
Also this morning, several people, including dual British nationals, have been arrested by Iran's Revolutionary Guard after anti-government protests that have been going on for months. State media reports they're the main leaders of the demonstrations and that some of those rounded up had been trying to leave the country. Sky News understands the Foreign Office is investigating the reports. An avalanche in the Austrian Alps has turned out to be less serious than initially feared. A large rescue operation was launched in the area between the resorts of Lech and Zers, but all 10 of those being searched for have now been found. French prosecutors say a 69-year-old man accused of killing 3 Kurdish people told investigators of his hatred of foreigners. The suspect was arrested on Friday after 2 men and a woman were shot dead at a Kurdish cultural centre and nearby cafe in Paris. He's set to appear before a magistrate today. Dozens of people have been taken to hospital in eastern Serbia after a freight train carrying ammonia derailed. A state of emergency has been declared in the town of Pirot. Locals are being told to stay indoors with windows sealed. Ammonia gas leaks are toxic and can be flammable. The King has used his first Christmas Day broadcast to express sympathy for those trying to struggle with the cost of living crisis. It was an historic first address, both for King Charles personally and the UK, as it marks the first time a male monarch has made a televised address on the 25th of December.
At this time of great anxiety and hardship, be it for those around the world facing conflict, famine or natural disaster, or for those at home finding ways to pay their bills and keep their families fed and warm, I particularly want to pay tribute to all those wonderfully kind people who so generously give food or donations, or that most precious commodity of all, their time, to support those around them in greatest need.
And reaction to the King's address dominates this morning's papers. The Mirror focuses on Charles's praise for NHS workers and sympathy for people struggling with bills. The Times also reports on the King using the address to commend tireless health workers. King of caring, says the Express, with a picture of the royal family on Christmas morning. A similar take in the Daily Mail, which also says the King spoke of a time of great hardship. While the Sun has the headline, The King of Hearts, and also focuses on his tribute to his late mother, the Queen. The Telegraph says the King spoke of a time of hardship, but also hope. Away from the royals, the Eye says the government is poised to abolish most NHS targets next year so the health service is run more like a localised school system. The Guardian says that the number of stay-at-home fathers has leapt by a third since the pandemic. Well, as we mentioned, cost of living was one of the big issues for the King in his Christmas address. With the new year around the corner, are there any signs that things could improve? And how can we get our personal finances prepared for 2023? Well, the independent financial advisor, Vanessa Barnes, is here to give us some insight. Vanessa, great to speak to you. It's been a really tough year for so many people, hasn't it? What are your top tips for the year ahead?
I think, well, if 2022 told us anything, it was that we can't predict what's going to happen in the next 12 months. But we are where we are and everybody's struggling. And we would recommend that everybody look at the personal finances. We've probably all splashed out a little bit too much over Christmas. Now's the time to sit down. Most of the members of the Personal Finance Society would recommend doing a written budget. So look at the things that you absolutely have to spend your money on and maybe try and save a little, cut a little bit back on the areas that you don't have to spend your money.
Well, obviously, with things like electricity bills being really, really high, there are things that people will really sort of struggle to say, well, I can't really cut back on that. So it's one thing cutting out luxuries, but when it comes to heating and eating, these are things people just can't really cut back on, are they?
No, they can't. I mean, one of the things that you can do is talk to the providers if you're really struggling and if you're having problems in lots of different areas and feel that you're fighting too many fires. Many members actually work on a pro bono basis with the Citizen Advice Bureau, and maybe they can approach there for a referral and talk to people about how they can manage different facets of their personal finances.
And in terms of inflation, obviously it's been really high this year. What are your hopes for the next year? Do you think it will stabilise? Do you think it will come down?
What seems to be happening at the moment is that the rate of increase is slowing. So we would hope that we're reaching it. Certainly seems to have peaked a bit more ahead of us in America. So hopefully we will see that happen over here. I think while things are going on as they are in the Ukraine, there's a problem in Europe-wide with inflation. And until that solution is achieved, I think it's going to be very difficult to see the end of these very, very pressing times.
And of course, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw interest rates going up again, and that's a real concern for those with mortgages. What are your top tips for getting through this next year? There'll be people who are on fixed rate mortgages or on kind of mortgages that aren't necessarily affected, but there'll be others who are on trackers or those who've got mortgages to renew over the next year.
Early intervention would be the top tip. So if you think that you're going to be coming off a fixed rate, you've got a couple of months to go, get in early with your existing provider and compare that. There's lots of comparison sites on the web that you can have a look at to look at what would be the best deals for you. Talk to a specialist about maybe looking at if you're on a buy. I know that a lot of people are struggling where they've perhaps put their life savings into a buy-to-let. So again, there are specialist lenders in that area. If you think you're struggling, the best thing you can do is talk to the mortgage provider as soon as you can. Don't wait until the debt overwhelms you.
OK, a bit gloomy, but good advice nevertheless. Vanessa Barnes, thanks very much for joining us on Boxing Day.
Pleasure.
Good morning, you're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories this morning. Russia says 3 of its military personnel have been killed by falling wreckage from a Ukrainian drone shot down over an airbase southeast of Moscow. Retailers are fearing a tough end to the year with a cost of living crisis and strikes likely to hit the Boxing Day sales. At least 50 people have now died in a huge winter storm that's brought days of Arctic conditions across Canada and the United States and even into northern Mexico. 250 homeless people in Scotland died last year. That's much higher than before the pandemic. Now, as soaring bills threaten to push more people into hardship, volunteers say the number of homeless people has surged and they're concerned about the winter months ahead. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis reports.
Good morning.
They pace the cold streets of Aberdeen, providing aid to those who have nothing.
Are you warm enough?
A group of people who bring help to the homeless in a time of escalating crisis.
I started over a year ago now, and when I started we were seeing kind of up to 20 people a day, giving them blankets, sleeping bags, food and clothes whenever they needed it. Now, because of the cost of living crisis and also the homelessness crisis, we're seeing it can be up to about 65 people a day.
Talk me through what life is like on the streets at the moment.
Hellish.
Gary hasn't had somewhere to call home for more than 30 years. This winter, he says, is worse than ever.
It's just a nightmare. It's just, you just want to gear up. I feel left behind. My situation's bad and there's no facilities out there now for people.
The most recent official statistics paint a grim picture. They reveal around 250 homeless people died here in Scotland last year, much higher than pre-pandemic times, and a deteriorating trend which is causing grave concern for what lies ahead.
It's a massive concern. The biggest issue for me within that is the age profile of people. The vast majority are under 45, and the trauma of experiencing homelessness that does lead to premature ageing. It leads to worsening of health conditions.
This is a survival mat and it takes 44 crisp packets.
Here in Inverness, Gillian makes sleeping bags for the homeless using old crisp packets, a cost-effective idea with far-reaching benefits.
The group that I'm part of, they got feedback from a guy who sleeps on the streets. And there was like tears in his eyes. He was so delighted with this because it's just life-changing.
A small gesture in just one rural community in a country where those without a home fear the long winter ahead. Conor Gillis, Sky News.
Well, King Charles used his first Christmas broadcast to sympathise with those struggling and families struggling to pay their bills and to praise individuals and organisations supporting those in need. And let's talk more about it with Chief Royal Correspondent for Newsweek, Jack Royston. Jack, good to see you today. Thank you for joining us. What did you make of the King's speeches? I suppose certainly in terms of that, somebody who's very wealthy themselves talking about the cost of living with a backdrop of Windsor Castle. Did it feel incongruous or not?
To some people, it definitely will, but I think actually the royal family have quite a long history of doing this, and Charles, indeed personally himself, of trying to focus their efforts on the people most in need. It was something that actually we saw in 2021. Charles gave the Queen's speech on her behalf because she had obviously experienced health problems, and he was kind of sat there on a gold throne talking about the cost of living crisis. People picked up on it at the time and said that it was awful positioning. Charles, I mean, if you look back over the course of his reign, a lot of his charity work has focused on trying to help the people most in need. So really it isn't actually anything new. I think some people also might feel it's slightly political in the other direction, that he's drawing attention to some things that the government might find quite difficult and uncomfortable. A lot of people in Britain might blame aspects of the cost of living crisis on certain government policies. But again, I think Charles has stayed just about on the right side of that line as well. And focused on what the royal family probably do best, which is actually try to help through their charitable endeavours.
What about religion? The defender of all faiths, he was happy to position himself as, and also those with none. Certainly something we probably wouldn't have expected the Queen to ever say.
No, exactly. The Queen was very firmly a Christian, and this was very visible in everything that she said. And Charles has for a long time tried to position himself as being a friend of a much broader cross-section of religious groups. There was actually, it was long kind of speculated that he might have a kind of interfaith coronation. That was one of the questions that Clarence House actually attempted to answer on their website back in the day when he was the Prince of Wales. So he has this long-standing commitment to trying to represent all faith groups, and here we also have him talking about representing those who have no faith at all. So we are seeing some subtle differences between the way that the Queen did things and the way that Charles did things, and they might not be as kind of attention-grabbing or showy or headline-grabbing as some of the other royal debates we have at the moment, particularly those about kind of Harry and Meghan. But actually, it is quite interesting to see the subtle ways that he's changed the way that the royal family do things.
And also standing and also doing it from inside the chapel. You know, we normally we saw the Queen usually seated with a desk, photographs in the background. That was different too, wasn't it?
Yes, and there is actually one very deft way in which that got him out of a bit of a problem, which is that we always have this debate. You know, the shots that you can see on your screen right now show photographs of royal family members. And so there are always these kind of recurring debates about who's in the photos, who should have been in and was left out. So this Christmas speech is quite unique in that it came after the Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary, which obviously included some quite dramatic bombshells. So had Charles been sat at that desk, he would have had to have taken a decision about which photographs to include there. And if he hadn't included Harry and Meghan, it would almost certainly have been commented on. Some would have interpreted it as a swipe. If he had included them, it would have been interpreted as an olive branch. But by doing this standing in St. George's Chapel, he was able to create the positioning of his connection with the Queen, because obviously he commented on the fact that it was near to where she was laid to rest, but he didn't have to engage with that question of which photos to have on the desk.
He did, though, not mention them, and we did see lots of images of other members of the royal family, didn't we?
We did, and the royal position on that would be that what we were seeing there was the royals at work, whereas Harry and Meghan, not being working royals, have not done anything that could be included as royal work. Obviously, clearly, they could have extended an olive branch to Harry and Meghan, and they have chosen not to. But I absolutely know that is what the royals would say. That they would say that they were only showing official royal functions. But one thing that's quite interesting is they could actually have shown Harry and Meghan in the days after the Queen died, when they did that joint walkabout in Windsor or at the Queen's funeral or one of the other commemorative events. So they clearly have made a conscious decision not to show pictures of them.
Interesting. Jack Royston from Newsweek, really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, also this morning, the Education Secretary's Twitter account appears to have been hacked. It's been posting tweets promoting a cryptocurrency. Gillian Keegan's profile picture has also been changed to an image of Twitter's owner, Elon Musk. Boxing Day, traditional day for hunting, but Labour says hunting laws should be tightened further, saying current legislation allows people to break the law. Official figures show that there have been around 430 convictions under the Hunting Act in the last decade. But the League Against Cruel Sports claims there were 303 reports of suspected illegal hunting over just 5 weeks recently. The government says there are no plans to strengthen the laws. A 7-year-old Ukrainian ice figure skater who fled the war to live with a family in Bristol has returned home to continue his training. Gosha and his mother Irina were among tens of thousands of refugees who arrived in the UK under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Well, earlier this year, Sky News filmed Gosha training here before dancing on ice. Judge Matt Evers offered to coach him. Sky's West of England correspondent Dan Whitehead caught up with the family, who are now back in Kiev.
Escaping a war zone, but still able to pursue his passion. For Gosha, staying on the ice was top priority, whether in Kyiv or Bristol. Now, 8 months on from fleeing to the UK, he and mother Irina have made the tough choice to return home.
We are happy. We enjoy being at home, even during these hard and difficult times. For us, exactly, this is the right decision. Because Gosha was crying, he was sometimes depressed because he's separated from his father. When we arrived, it took me maybe more than months to adapt, because we had so many changes. city looked a little bit depressed. You can feel that war is in air.
There you go. And step cross under. Push, cross under. Hold it.
After appearing on Sky News, Dancing on Ice star Matt Evers reached out to help. The pro training kept Gosha's skills up. Now back home, constant power cuts because of the war. In training, he's often under backup lighting.
We have, days without electricity at home. We are in normal regime now. We train 3-5 full days per week, usually 3 lessons per day.
Gosha and his mum spent 4 months living with their host, Caroline. One day, they say, they hope to return.
We would like someday, yes, return like tourists to see Caroline. I would like to see them even in Kiev if we have peace and they would like to come.
Show me the bears, Gosha. What is his name?
Kabi.
Despite the relief of being back home with family, the war and worry continues.
Before this blackout, we had another fear. I even forgot about this. It was fear all the time and risk of nuclear disaster. And it just changes all this nightmare. So I hope soon somehow the missiles will finish.
It will be a Christmas under conflict, but one that means they're finally back home. Dan Whitehead, Sky News.
You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Coming up, a run-through of the morning's papers, many of them leading on the King's historic first Christmas message. Well, with me now to review the Boxing Day papers is the journalist and author Yasmin Alibi-Brown and the sociologist Ashley Frawley. Lovely to see you both. Thanks a lot for joining us. Yasmin, to you first, the front of the Telegraph, lots of the papers covering the King's speech. We were just talking about it a short while ago. What did you make of it? Do you think you got the tone right?
I didn't watch it. I have to say I'm not a royalist. But the Daily Telegraph, of course, is a very establishment paper, and it's gone into detail about how he expressed concern for those going through this cost of living crisis and the sympathy he feels. And I just think it's a bit like us clapping for nurses, isn't it? Clapping, you can't eat claps. You can't survive on claps. You can't eat sympathy. It would have been good if he'd announced a pile of money from the new king to food banks, say, to help them through this crisis. They are one of the most richest clans in the country. So I'm really sorry if I don't mean to disrespect people who are monarchists, but I thought this really wasn't right for the times we're living in.
Ashley, what did you make of it? Did it stick in your throat?
I mean, it was a fairly safe speech, as it would be. I mean, it's a Christmas it's a Christmas message, and so he paid tribute to the areas of society which are struggling at the moment, as one might expect. And of course, it's going to strike a lot of people as hollow when someone who is so wealthy basically offers us kind words. I do kind of agree with that, but it's a Christmas message, and it's a lot of emptiness about light and hope and all these sorts of things. And I suppose there's only so much expectation one can have.
The front of the Sun as well, isn't it, Ashley, is one of the ones that you picked out. And lots of pictures on the fronts of the papers also of the royal family at Sandringham and their first Christmas service with the King at the helm.
Yes, it's very much trying to put forward a very positive picture of the royal family, downplaying some of the drama of recent months. And I'm not sure that, I mean, for me, it just seems quite an obvious, media show to kind of put forward this harmonious picture of the royal family and the future king. And but everybody knows the subtext that's being very, very carefully orchestrated here, which is that there's a lot of drama going on. There's a lot of drama going on generally in the country, but there's a lot of drama going on in the royal family that they are trying very, very hard to pretend perhaps doesn't exist. And I'm not sure the country will necessarily buy it, but I do wish them a happy Christmas as much as anyone would.
Okay. Well, let's move away from the King's speech. And Yasmin, you've gone to the front of The Guardian. And this is a story about more dads staying at home as a result of COVID, more dads taking on the childcare responsibilities and the home care responsibilities.
Yeah, and this is kind of an accidental thing that has happened because of the years of lockdown and then working from home. And a lot of people, men and women, are still working from home. And one of the sort of extraordinary developments out of this often happens in history. One thing leads to another. And what seems to have happened is that more dads are not only working from home, but taking more responsibility for the children. And according to the ONS, for example, the numbers are higher of the dads who are kind of finding also that they've been missing out, which I find the most interesting and affirming things in this story. That the interviews, dad saying, I used to go before they woke up, the kids woke up, so hardly saw them. Now I take my daughters to school and it's changed my life. So I think if this carries on, it's a very good thing. But never forget, it's still the mums doing the majority of the work. Often unsung, actually. Too often unsung.
Well, indeed, the numbers going up. It was 1 in 14 men who did that caring role, and now it's 1 in 9. So it is still a very small proportion, but it is definitely at least evening out a little bit, which is great news. Ashley, your next story also about childcare, actually, and children. This is a story inside the Mirror, and this is Labour's plan for more free childcare for families. What are they proposing?
Yes, so there are talks that Labour is drawing up plans for a major expansion of free childcare that could be worth around £6 billion per year. And one of the ideas being tabled is to make 30 hours free childcare per week universal for parents of all 2, 3, and 4-year-olds. And that, of course, is up from currently 3 and 4-year-olds only get 30 hours if their parents work at least 16 hours per week. Otherwise, they get 15. Now, of course, there are still going to be gaps here, but this is one of the areas in which policy can make a huge impact, and it's obvious this is why Labour is interested in it. For one thing, one area in which you can grow the economy is by getting more people to go into work, and in particular to get more women into work. And you can also attempt to close the gender pay gap, as a lot of women will leave the workplace when it just doesn't pay, when childcare is simply too expensive. They'll either work part-time or they will leave altogether. Of course, the pay gap being when women, part of it being when women work fewer hours. On the other hand, we have to be really careful about these kinds of policies because a lot of countries have increased childcare with the idea of getting more women into work. And the idea is that by getting women to work, you can pull back other forms of support for families, and you improve the condition of families through the marketplace. But what can happen is if you are making things a lot harder on a lot of different fronts and you push women into work, you can push women into insecure work, poorly paid work. And this can mean that there's you actually widen inequalities between women of different social classes. And this is what we've seen across Europe in recent years. And so we have to be careful that this doesn't, that, we have to keep our eyes open to make sure that a policy that sounds good on the front of it or on the face of it isn't actually an attempt to cut welfare elsewhere.
Interesting way of looking at it, Ashley. Thanks very much for that. Yasmin, back to COVID. You've picked this story about COVID data, and it's going to change. I mean, they're going to stop announcing the R rate. I mean, in all fairness, have any of us been paying attention to the R rate really recently at all?
No, and I think this is quite disturbing news, actually, because we can see this week and the week before, the numbers of COVID cases and even hospitalization cases are going up. We've entered the period of winter, and with all the cost of living crisis and so on, we've got more people getting colds and flu, and we're getting more people getting COVID. And I think there's something very wrong in giving a message to the people that it's over, it's fine, we're living with COVID, we don't need to give you the information. I think it's a big mistake, and it's being done for the wrong reasons, because Rishi Sunak has all the time he's been in government, and not all the time he's been in prime minister, has hated lockdown, has hated the fact that COVID came along and interrupted the capitalist cycle. But, it happened, and it's happening again around the world. China is now seeing huge numbers of fatalities. We are interconnected. So I think this is a terrible policy.
OK. Ashley, your thoughts?
Well, we have to understand that, of course, what's happening around the world is going to be a little bit different than what's going to hit us at home. Obviously, we've had a very effective vaccination program. We have built up an enormous amount of immunity that China has not. So we have to be a little bit careful in drawing these kinds of conclusions globally versus what might happen at home.
OK. Ashley and Yasmin, thank you both very much.